Hi everyone, it seems you all love nesting dies and different ways to use them because the last nesting die video I put out was really popular. So I've found this one that I filmed a long time ago that shows you 3 different ways of using your nesting dies, full cards created, so you can see from start to finish how I've really utilised the best of those nesting dies. Now you may call them layering dies, shaped dies, whatever it may be. You'll find a link in the description below for the ones I've used. And let's go and see from beginner, intermediate to advanced 3 different techniques that you can be using with yours. I'm going to be using the Creative Craft Products large nestable labels, and for this first technique I'm going to pick the largest of 3 dies, and I usually go with my pattern paper first, choose that first. I'm going with the Stamperia pattern paper here, then I choose my base card stock to match it, and I'm going for this beautiful sort of deep wine red colour. This is part of the Creative Craft Products cardstock range. I'm going to fold this in half. I'm actually making my own card base rather than using a pre-made one. So score this in half and then place your die just over the score line. So you've got a little bit of a join there. Die cut through both layers, and when you take the die off the cardstock, you'll have a card base there and it's all secured at the top. Then we want to complete the shape, so I'm going to recut this same die from the same cardstock, but the entire die this time, not overlapping any edges, and this is going to give us a topper to go over the top of our base and make it all look nice and smooth and streamlined and as if it's one piece. So I'm going to glue the two together using my book binding glue from Creative Craft Products there. A little bit of excess, so wipe that away, and there we go. So we now have a card base. I'm just going to snip the ends. I start with the back panel first, and if it still won't stand on its own, I snip the front, but I prefer not to snip the front if I can get away with it. This has now created my shaped card base, and then I go in with my mats and layers, and this is the beauty of nesting dies. You can use the mats and layers to create apertures, to create frames, and like I say, your mats and layers are so easy with nesting dies. So I've cut myself a large mat there, and then I'm going to use that same size, which is sort of the second largest die, along with the third largest die together on some gold mirror card. This is then going to create myself a frame, and it's going to sit absolutely perfectly around the outside of the card base that we've just made, just sitting over that patterned paper. Now I always use a double-sided tape. This is one from CraftStash. You can see my reflection in there, but this is the double-sided low tack tape, sorry, not double-sided, low tack tape, and it just holds your dies down absolutely perfectly. So you can see there I'm just releasing the tape because you can reuse it, pop everything back in the bag because I've used all of those, but inside each of these you do get a sentiment as well. So I'm going to recut that sentiment from a scrap piece of mirror card that came out of the middle of the gold frame, and then all I need to do is glue everything together. And there we have it, a beautiful card base, a shape that you probably would never be able to buy pre-made. So then let's move on to the second card technique. This one is a spinner card, and it's really good fun. You can make it with pretty much any shape of nesting die, but I've never found nesting dies that are as unusual shape as these, but they make for really exciting shaped spinners. So again, I'm choosing my pattern paper first before I go on to choose my card base. Now I'm folding a piece of A4 cardstock in half, and I'm overlapping that scored edge again. Just as we did with the last one, I'm going to make myself a shaped card base too for this one. I just think it will look really fun and really unusual, really different. So I'm cutting through both layers there, and with the pattern paper I'm going to cut myself a full piece of the largest die, a full panel, and that will go over the top, and that will kind of complete the shape. So where I've overlapped the edge there, that won't be showing. Now with this layer, rather than just cutting the solid, I am going to cut into it in a moment, which is why I'm kind of jiggling it about on my pattern paper, just to work out where's best to cut from. I didn't want to cut out the butterflies because I knew they wouldn't be seen in the end result, so I've sort of left them in the middle there for later use. So just die cutting that solid panel, and you'll be able to see in a moment how we can place that onto our card base. I'm not going to glue it down just yet for a good reason. I'll explain that in a moment. And just checking, I'm going to cut myself that into a frame, and then I'm going to cut an aperture into my card, and this is going to go through both the pattern paper and the card base, but as I say, I'm not gluing it yet, so I'm having to be really careful about keeping those two together in the die cutting machine. This is just me going off to my larger format die cutting machine, placing them together really carefully. You can use your low tack tape as well, and cutting them both through at the same time to make sure that the aperture I'm cutting is in exactly the same place both times. So just releasing everything there, and there you can see that worked absolutely perfectly. So now I'm going to cut myself the next part, which is going to be another frame. So using a middle-sized die to what I've used so far, plus the smaller one that I cut the aperture with. They can both go through my smaller machine, which is on my desk. Doing this from a pink because there are elements of pink in that pattern paper. And you'll see I've got the frame there beautifully cut, and it fits absolutely perfectly. This is kind of what we've just done in a way on the first card, but now for the different part. So I'm layering a piece of pink cardstock and a piece of green pattern paper together and cutting it with the smallest of my nesting dies. These two will go back to back in a little while, which is why I'm happy to cut them together. So they are going to be the spinner element for our card. Now I'm just going off here to get a little bit of thread or cotton, something really thin, really fine, that's going to allow your element to spin inside the card. I've gone with white because I've got a white card base. A little bit of glue down the back of one of the smaller nesting dies, and then encase that thread in with the second one on top, making sure that the threads are in the center of both ends of that smaller die, trimming it with lots of excess. Now this is the bit that gets a little bit fiddly. I went with a red liner tape on both the top and bottom of my card base. Notice I still haven't stuck my mats and layers down yet, because I want all of this to be hidden with the mats and layers. So I'm going to lift up the sticky. Now what I didn't realise is that the thread wouldn't actually stick too well to the red liner tape, and so what I ended up having to do was actually twist the thread around that bottom part a few times and stick it that way. So that held it in place long enough for me to then get the top attached in the same way, threading the thread over the top, over, under, and trimming it once it had been round a few times. And then once I glue my mats and layers over the top, that's going to secure everything in nice and tight. That's not going anywhere. So putting the mat on and then the frame afterwards. You could do this with foam if you prefer, but flat's absolutely fine. And then the magic. So if you close your card, but before you close it, twist that spinner element all in one direction for as long as you can. When they open it up, you'll get this spinning motion. It will spin all the way back round. This looks fantastic with things like butterflies. Now the third technique, and this one is the triple shaker, which is such a fun technique. It's such a fun card. I love doing this for children. They think, you know, you can do it in bright colours. I think it lends itself to bright colours actually. So I've chosen myself 6 nesting dies of this fun tag shape. Gone from really quite big, which is going to basically be my card base shape and size, all the way down to quite small. I'm going to put them in pairs. From each one I'm going to cut myself 8. The largest one is going to be the base shape, so we'll see this with just the first one, and then we're going to use the largest one and the second one in from that, from same white cardstock, to cut a frame to go around this. We're then going to do that with the middle set of nesting dies, and then we're going to do that again with the smaller set, and each of these are going to sit on top of each other. Now I'm actually saving a lot of cardstock by using the innards that I've just cut out, technically the waist, to cut out the neck size down. So this is why I've started with the largest, going up to or down to the smallest, because this way I don't feel like I waste quite so much cardstock. Now once all my pieces are put together, I've started inking the backgrounds of the solid bits, the 3 solid pieces. I don't need to go all over the background because the middle and the very outside of these aren't going to be seen. I kind of forgot about that to start with until I got to the last one, but it's fine. I tried to go with a slightly lighter colour towards the top and a darker colour towards the bottom. I've used my Distress Oxides, but any sort of blending inks would work. But to be honest, you're going to see quite a small amount of this, except on the middle one. I went with the colours of sequins that I had. So the flat sequins, I had a pinky red, a mint green and a silver. So I sort of went with those colours and spritzed it all with water just to make sure that I've got a little bit of distressing going on there. And then it's time to put these together. So I needed to cut myself some acetate windows once these were dry, and I actually did this by hand, but you could use your dies to cut the acetate if you wanted to. If you use your dies, you need probably something like a metal shim to cut against so that the acetate cuts through cleanly, but it is absolutely possible. Then with each acetate window, I glued the frame on first, keeping the frames white. And then on the reverse of that, on the acetate, I put some foam tape all the way around the edge. So just making sure there's no gaps whatsoever for my sequins to drop out. Some of the curves I managed to walk the foam all the way around. So releasing the backing, and then I adhered each one of these frames to their matching background. Once the ink was dry, it wouldn't stick if the ink was still wet. With this one I forgot to put my sequins in, but thankfully it hadn't fully stuck down, so I could open the top up a little bit, and there's my first layer. I repeated this with the bluey greeny colour and also the silver as well, making sure that I was putting my sequins in before I stuck the acetate window and frame down onto the base piece. Then it was time to layer up my smaller ones onto the bigger ones. So there's 2 layers, then I did the grey, and I did exactly the same, sticking that over the top onto the mint layer. And how cool does that look? So which one of those 3 was your favourite? I think it's probably for me the spinner, but that shaker card looks absolutely fantastic, especially at Christmas time. If you put like a snowy scene on top and have glitter and snow inside each of the shaker layers. Either way, let me know in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you again very soon for another technique video. Take care, everybody.